It has been 10 days now since the presidential election there, which many international observers and supporters of the opposition candidates say was rigged. For a solid week after that election, the streets were filled with massive, mostly peaceful protests, with demonstrators calling for a new, free and fair election. But on Friday, the supreme leader, who has sided with President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, warned protesters that there would be violent retribution if they continued to protest. Saturday did still see large numbers of people in the streets, but also a massive police and military presence, with widespread reports of violence against demonstrators, as well as many reported arrests. Sunday and today, the crowds in the streets were smaller in the context of what some people described as martial law. So has the government succeeded in breaking the back of the opposition? Will there be further protests? Tonight, we have at least part of an answer. A new message posted in all places on the Facebook page of the opposition candidate Mir Hussein Moussavi, calling for another round of demonstrations on Thursday. Like some previous demonstrations, Moussavi has called for Thursdays to be held in honor of those killed in the uprising thus far. Iranian state TV says the official death toll thus far is 19. Many observers expect that the real toll is far higher. But one death in particular has become a galvanizing symbol, both within Iran and increasingly around the world. She's a 26-year-old woman named Neda Agha Sultan. She was shot and she died at a demonstration in Tehran on Saturday. As people near her tried desperately to stanch her bleeding and try to keep her alive, two different witnesses on the scene captured her last moments on video. Those images have now rocketed around the world. Now, we're going to show a short portion of one of those videos now, not to be gratuitously graphic, but because this has become one of the most, if not the single most iconic moment of this uprising. So I want to give you fair warning here. This is not appropriate for kids to watch. This is a very difficult scene. We're only going to show about 11 seconds of it. Here it is. The video continues beyond that point, showing ultimately a great deal of blood. Obviously, Ms. Agha Sultan did not survive this shooting. Over the weekend, this video circulated not only worldwide, but within Iran. The Associated Press today reporting that even as internet and cell phone networks continue to be disrupted inside Iran, you can still share videos and images device to device using Bluetooth. And that may be how the Neda video is being distributed within Iran. Neda's death has become a rallying cry for opposition protesters, so much so that today a tribute rally was organized in her honor. The Christian Science Monitor reports that about 1,000 people attempted to gather in one of Tehran's main squares this afternoon. But when the protesters arrived at the square, they were met by rows and rows and rows of riot police and militia who fired tear gas at them, as well as live ammunition into the air. To prevent new demonstrations from forming, police reportedly broke up any groups on the street that numbered more than 3 people. Today, gunmen were reportedly visible in the windows of government buildings, and policemen with cameras were seen taking photos of protesters. In its most serious warning yet, Iran's Revolutionary Guard today posted a statement on its website ordering demonstrators to halt their protests immediately or, quote, be prepared for a resolution and revolutionary confrontation with the guards, Basij, and other security forces and disciplinary forces. The Iranian government has also rounded up and arrested family members of those who support the opposition, such as Iran's former president Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. Rafsanjani is a vocal opponent of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and he currently sits on 2 of Iran's most important clerical bodies, the Expediency Council and the Assembly of Experts. Despite being that well connected, despite reportedly being Iran's richest man, over the weekend, Rafsanjani's daughter and 4 other relatives were arrested and detained and then later released. The reason for the arrest, according to a security official who spoke to Iran's Fars news agency, was, quote, to protect them from assassination by terrorist groups and rioters who would blame the government in an effort to create more turmoil. You get that? They are supporters of the opposition being arrested to protect them from being assassinated by the opposition as a ploy. Yeah, and it's not just relatives of opposition leaders who are being detained, it's anyone associated with the opposition. A 26-year-old leading member of Moussavi's campaign was arrested at Tehran's airport as he was about to fly out of the country to England. Meanwhile, Mr. Moussavi himself says that in the event that he himself is arrested, he's calling for a general strike across Iran in protest of that arrest. And a general strike is just the kind of thing that toppled the Shah and brought about the revolution in Iran 30 years ago. In other words, we're sort of at an edge-of-your-seat historic moment at this point. Joining us now is Neda Parsi, president of the National Iranian American Council, a nonpartisan organization representing Iranian Americans. Mr. Parsi, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again.
We are now beginning to see smaller numbers of people gathering in the streets of Tehran. Do you think that's a sign that this government crackdown has been successful? Are they essentially forcing the movement to wind down?
On the contrary, I think, first of all, the mere fact that you've had such a large number of people nevertheless show up in complete defiance of the Supreme Leader's order, and to have sustained that for 2 days after he ordered him to come back and seize all demonstrations is a clear indication that they've already challenged his authority. They have overcome the barrier of fear. And at this stage, I think it's more accurate to say that it is Khamenei that has misread the situation, because for every more Neda, for every more killing, you will have a more determined and more radicalized movement on the streets demanding for change.
In terms of the authority of the Supreme Leader, the Guardian Council today admitted that there were, in fact, some voting irregularities. They admitted that there were at least 50 jurisdictions that had more votes than voters. Does that admission specifically also undercut the Supreme Leader? I mean, he gave his seal of approval to these election results.
Well, actually, I think the Supreme Leader's authority and credibility has been hurt mostly by his own actions, and the fact that even though he is supposed to play more of a balancing role, he has proven himself to be quite a partisan in this conflict. I think the news about the about the complete exaggerated number of votes in some of those precincts more is an opening that may enable them to say, okay, there's clearly been something wrong here, and then be able to save face and back down and essentially blame the Interior Ministry or someone else that there's been some errors.
Neda, in terms of the intimidation tactics that we're seeing here, in terms of the different, essentially, weapons at the disposal of the government to try to shut down the opposition, how significant do you think it is that the government has been arresting the family members of Mr. Rafsanjani? What message do you think they're trying to send there? We know they've also arrested a number of journalists and a number of other opposition figures.
I think, to be quite frank, I think they're starting to show signs of desperation. Clearly, they don't have a plan anymore. They certainly had a very, very clear plan during the first couple of days of this, but by this stage, a lot of their actions are just acts of desperation. They're starting to fall into the same type of a pattern as you saw during the time of the Shah. For every person that was killed, there were more demonstrations being held, and eventually, the more brutality that the government showed, the more evident, the more obvious some sort of a change, major change started to become. And I think I have to say that I'm quite surprised by the way that the Khamenei government has acted.
In terms of the parallels to 1979, the parallels to the revolution, the end of the reign of the Shah, Moussavi has now urged his supporters to go on strike if he is arrested. And obviously that's one way to dissuade the government from arresting you, if you're saying that there will be a general strike if that happens. But how effective, how important do you think it would be if there was a general strike? Compare the impact of that to the impact of these daily protests in the streets.
Well, I think it would be quite significant. It could cripple the entire economy if there was a general strike. And at some point, I think Moussavi will probably also feel that he needs to advise his followers to start manifesting their protests in a different way than just demonstrations. Because demonstrations are extremely disruptive, and also the casualties that come as a result of the demonstrations are quite problematic, of course, in the violence. If he calls for a general strike, it may actually be more effective while at the same time avoid the bloodshed that we're currently seeing on the streets of Tehran and other cities.
Neda Parsi is president of the National Iranian American Council. Neda, I know you've had zero sleep in the past 10 days or so as you've been reporting on this and doing so many different television appearances. Thanks for making the time again to be with us.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.